the general perception you would get if you listen to mainstream media would be that since 1988, Hamas has embraced violence and been on an unrelenting campaign of terrorism and violence. And all it does is seek to destroy the state of Israel and push all the Jews into the sea, right? That's the narrative. That's also fiction because Hamas has a very intricate, complex history that cannot be boiled down to such a simple narrative as the one I just told. Hamas, of course, was founded in 1973. Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, he establishes an organization called Al-Mujamma Al-Islami, the Islamic
Okay,
Collective,
I
if you
see.
will. And for its first 15 years, from 1973 to 1987, even 1988, you could say, the organization is a charity organization. It is funding schools. It is funding orphanages. It is dedicating itself to religious preaching, social services for the poor, health clinics.
Yes.
Right? It's a charity organization, and it's working on behalf of the Palestinian poor. And by the way, that's the reason why in the early 1980s the organization receives support and funding from the Israeli government. Okay, because it's an apolitical, nonviolent organization. And
Yes.
you might have expected the organization to remain apolitical and remain nonviolent if it weren't for the first Intifada, during which the Israeli military in Gaza from December 1987 until the end of 1988, the Israeli military
Wow.
slaughtered 142 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Do you know how many Israeli soldiers and civilians were killed in response?
Most likely much less. Wow.
Zero,
Even
zero,
zero.
zero. Because it was
How
a
many?
nonviolent movement.
143, correct?
142 Palestinians were
140.
slaughtered
Wow.
from
Wow.
December 7th, 1987 until December 31st, 1988. 142 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip were murdered by Israeli soldiers. And in return, the Palestinian people of Gaza killed zero Israeli civilians
Wow.
and soldiers in the first year. Now, why am I telling you this? Because history didn't have to turn out the way it turned out. Hamas didn't have to embrace violence. It was a result of Israel's brutal suppression of Palestinian nonviolent resistance that led Hamas to embrace violence. And so in December, you have shortly after the outbreak of this revolt, Hamas leaders get together and say, this is intolerable. We can't accept this, and begin to talk about violence. And then in August 1988, they passed their infamous charter that calls for an Islamic state in all of Palestine and identifies the Jews as the enemies of the Palestinian people. But remember that it was 2 months before that August 1988 charter came out that you have Hamas leaders, actually even before that, already like 6 months before, in February 1988, you have Hamas leaders traveling to Tel Aviv, meeting with then Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres, trying to broker a deal, a peace deal. And then in June, they go back to Tel Aviv. Mahmoud al-Zahar, Hamas's number 3 in command, goes to Tel Aviv, meets with Yitzhak Rabin, and presents to him a document that says, if Israel declares its intent to withdraw from the occupied territories, allows a third party like the UN to enter the territories to facilitate Palestinian elections in which Palestinians would elect their own government without any Israeli interference, then we're open to negotiating peace. That was 2 months
Wow.
before the charter. And guess what? Israel had no interest in peace because peace required withdrawal from the occupied territories. And it was in the 6 years leading up to 1988, from 1982 to 1988, that the Israeli government tripled its settler population in the occupied Palestinian territories. Of course, it wasn't going to withdraw from the settlements. It was in the process of actively expanding Israeli control
Absolutely.